So you got your Guinness, you got a shot of whiskey. Don't be an idiot and put it in. Just same effect, except you won't chip a tooth. L'chaim. Gross. Okay, so, excuse me. The Goonies. Holy shit. I love the Goonies. So, the movie opens up, and you got these... Not these. They're a criminal family, right? They're called the Fratellis. There's three of them. There's, Mama. And then there's Larry and Mo. I don't remember their names. Mo is in jail, right? And the movie opens up with a shot of a courthouse? No. Jailhouse. Courthouse, jail. I don't remember. Mo allegedly has hung himself in his cell, and he's like just hanging like this. And the guard, he's put a little note on his chest that says, "To whom it may concern." And the guard walks up and he's like, "Oh, to whom it may concern." Flips it over to the other side and he's like, "You schmuck, you really think I'd be stupid enough to kill myself?" And then Mo is like, "Kill myself?" And then bam, just cracks the guy on the head with a pipe. There's a whole big chase scene. So then you move to the actual Goonies, and there's a bunch of them. You got the main leader, I guess. His name is Mikey. Excuse me. You got his brother, who I initially, in my head, referred to as Swole Bro. Because he's always lifting and working out and just being like super strong and shit. Then there's their buddy Mouth, who I guess is the son of a plumber, and also a real monstrosity, just a horrible person. But he's funny, so everyone likes him. And then there's Data, who is ultra smart. Then you have the fat kid. Because, it's the 80s and it's a kind of a buddy, it's like a kid buddy comedy. You gotta have the fat kid. Everyone calls him Chunk because, he's fat and it's funny. And I think they live in Maine? So, you cut to Mikey and Brandon's house and, they're just expositioning all over the screen. They're talking about how their family home is about to be bought up by the local white people cult, also known as the country club, that wants to turn their house into a golf, not club, golf course. It wants to, the local country club wants to turn their family home that they've been living in for years into a golf course. Of course, flying in the face of all legality and everything to do with anything that's remotely possible with real estate, but whatever. After all that exposition, we're automatically reintroduced in greater detail to all the Goonies when Mouth shows up, I guess just to, spout random jokes and put his feet up on tables. Data shows up in the most James Bond way that anyone can show up, and they act like this is totally normal. Chunk shows up, and of course, Mouth makes him do a humiliating, barbaric ritual called the Truffle Shuffle, which I will now reenact for you. Being, about, 12, maybe 13, and bored as hell, they decide, hey, let's go check out what's in the attic. And they fuck around with a lot of the dad's stuff, because apparently the dad was an assistant curator at a museum before, he apparently went bankrupt, but he was an assistant curator at a museum, so he kind of had it coming. Chunk breaks something, or maybe it was Mikey who broke something. I don't know, because Mikey fucks up a lot in this too. Anyway, somebody breaks something, and they find an old pirate map with a bunch of holes in it. And it's got a lot of Spanish written all over it, so Mouth immediately translates something about death and a lot more death. Like, hey, don't follow the clues on this map, or like there will be a lot of death. Mikey is like, we gotta find One-Eye Willie's treasure. Like, this is obviously a map to the treasure of One-Eye Willie, which is supposedly a positively titanic hoard of Spanish doubloons, precious gems, and just those two things. So they're riding around and they find this random rocky cliff, which Mikey immediately determines is the right place for them to be. And then he holds up this this map, and magically, without him even having to logic any of it, he immediately lines up the holes in the map with these giant ass rocks out in the middle of the ocean. And they're like, oh, this must be the place. So now that we're here, what do we do? Mouth, who is apparently only along as a translator, and he's like, oh, we go X amount of steps in X direction, and they go there and they see this old abandoned restaurant, I guess. Like, if you've ever been to Maine or like New England or any of those areas, like, you'd know that there are certain businesses that are only open during the summer, during like tourist season and stuff. This is one of them. And we see in the distance that there is this group of people going in and out of the restaurant. And we find out later, once the boys approach, that this group is the Fratellis. It cuts back to Bran. Cuts back to Bran. We get our first glimpse of Andy and her friend, whose name I can't remember, being driven somewhere by this, I'm just going to call him a polo douche. This polo douche called Troy, which, I'm sorry, if we're gonna rank douche names, Troy hits maybe number 2 right under the name Tanner. And there's a douche named number 0 that I'm fairly certain is something like Tristan. Maybe Tristan is like douche name number 0. And then there's Troy. Like, I'm sorry.
They all start with T.
Right?
Conspiracy.
They all start with T. And Troy, has to be all douche bro, and he's like, nah, let me give you a ride, because Bran was making the mistake of riding within 2 feet, at least within arm's reach of a douche bro with a car. He grabs his arm, and they ride along the road going at, I think, 50 miles an hour at the peak. And then douche bro just lets go. So we go back to the Goonies, and they are met face to face with the woman who, she is the mother, the leader of the Fratelli clan. She's Mama. After that, they all sit down, and the mother goes in the back because they're like, she's like, oh, what do you want? But, before that, one of the funniest scenes in the entire movie, Mouth, who, is a penultimate smartass, after being asked, like, oh, this is a restaurant, like, what do you want? Mouth goes off on a diatribe, like, I want the veal, I want the linguine, I want everything you got, I want the most delicious food you got. So, Mama, because Mama takes, I gotta respect her for this, Mama takes absolutely no shit from anybody. Mama just grabs his face, pulls out a switchblade, and said, the only thing we serve here is tongue. And she turns to the whole group, you boys like tongue? After that, she forces them to sit down because she just threatened to rip out one of their friends' tongues with a switchblade, so why wouldn't you listen to the crazy woman with a knife? And she goes in the back room, and so Mikey pretends like he's got to go to the bathroom. He goes downstairs, and he's given very specific instructions to stay to the right, which he obviously doesn't listen to. He ends up going down a hallway. He hears like these weird sounds. He follows them, and he sees... Christ, I can't remember if Larry was the one with the glasses or Mo was the one with the glasses. The one without the glasses is singing opera to this slightly deformed-looking fellow from the back, and then Mikey is still like all about this treasure. Like, he's really like one-track mind. Like, there is treasure here, la la la. I don't remember what it is that gets them motivated to go and check the basement for treasure. I think it was something to do with Chunk's mom. And they go downstairs, and Mikey's like, hey, you guys want to see the freak? And they're like, no. And Mikey's like, oh, come on, you got to see the freak. So they, I guess, check it out? Or do they check it out? I don't remember if they check it out. By the way, he's not a freak. His name is Sloth, and he's the best character in the entire movie. But, before that, Bran and Andy end up almost having a kiss, but... you know, I'm not even gonna lie. The entire group actively cock blocks them at every turn. So they go looking for clues because Mikey is utterly convinced that there is some way to get to One-Eyed Willie's treasure through here. And I still, again, don't remember what it was. I know it was Chunk's fault, though, because he ends up knocking over the water jug he was guzzling, and in a... not the first moment of completely over-the-top serendipity. The water from the broken jug runs into this grate that's underneath the fireplace. So the Goonies are all automatically like, oh, we can go down there. So they go down there, and they find this pit, and they go down into the pit. And as they're going down into the pit, I think Chunk decides to stay behind. They find the corpse of a guy who was referenced earlier in the movie, Chester Copperpot, who was apparently looking for One-Eyed Willie's treasure before they were, and he said he'd found it, but he never showed up again. So they find his corpse, or more specifically, his skeleton crushed under a rock. They proceed to loot his dead body. This trap gets sprung, because that's One-Eyed Willie. He's got a boner for traps. These ridiculous Rube Goldberg traps, but traps all the same. And they turn it. His hand gets stuck in the wall, and he has to like turn it a certain way to undo it. But then once he undoes it, it was Data. No, it wasn't Data. It was Mikey. Was it Data or Mikey? I can't remember. Something about a pitfall trap. Anyway, once it gets done, they have to deal with a pitfall trap or something. No, that's later. Ah, damn it. I'm trying. So, there's a key. They go like this. There's a Rube Goldberg thing. I don't quite remember. But then, Data falls into a pit trap. This is where I think he's got superpowers, because he uses this gadget that just shoots out of his wrist that's essentially nothing but a pair of fake plastic teeth on the end of a bungee, not even a bungee cord, just a fucking slinky. By this point, the Fratellis have managed to deduce that there is something down in this, like, underneath the thing. They're following the Goonies. The Goonies have already kind of disabled all the traps, so they don't have nearly as much trouble getting through. But they store Chunk away with their I'm just gonna say mutated. Their mutated brother Sloth, who is hideous to look upon, but with a heart of gold, obviously, which is again why he's my favorite character in the entire movie. So he and Chunk bond over a baby Ruth, and Chunk gets broken out by Sloth, and they both follow the Fratellis. So you got the Fratellis following the Goonies, and Chunk and Sloth following the Fratellis, and they end up finding this organ made entirely of bones, completely, entirely of bones. And Andy, in true Deus Ex Machina fashion, has apparently had piano lessons. So they find a couple musical notes on the back of One-Eyed Willie's map. Andy plays the notes correctly. This stone drawbridge comes down out of the wall, and wherever she messes up, some of the floor falls away, whatever. They end up moving through that. They find a water slide. They slide down the slide, and they end up falling into a Titanic chlorine pool. I'm sorry, no water is that blue. And they find One-Eyed Willie's ship. They find One-Eyed Willie's treasure trove. They stuff their pockets. And then they're like, well, what are we going to do about the Fratellis? Like, hey, how about... Mikey's like, he references some movie, and he's like, hey, how about we leave the Hardy Boys. He references the Hardy Boys. And he's like, hey, how about we leave a trail of treasure going one way, and then we hide in this other part. And then Mama comes out of nowhere, and she's like, hey, that's a great idea, but fuck you, kids. Like, we're in charge now. And, like, whips out a huge pistol. And it's like, okay, here, you're with us now. I think Mama is about to straight up murder Andy's friend and Mouth. No, she's about to make them walk the plank tied together, which is essentially straight up murder because you can't swim like that. You drown. And then you hear this, one of the most iconic sounds in movie history, even if you don't know what it's from. Hey, you guys! And it's fucking Sloth and Chunk, who somehow managed to get up into the crow's nest. And you've got Sloth imitating, he was watching an old-timey pirate movie at one point, and I don't know what it is. But he imitates it by, like, taking out a dagger that I don't know where he found. And he's wearing a pirate hat. I don't know where he found it. And he ends up, like, just sliding down the sail like a badass pirate, which I have no problem with. And he ends up beating the crap out of both of his brothers. And then we get a great joke where, you get throw Mama from the boat. Hope you finally get it. And Chunk, has a great line where he everyone's like, oh my god, Chunk. And then he's like, that's Captain Chunk to you. Let's get the hell out of here. And then they all end up running. Anyway, they escape. Coincidentally, there are two deputies from the local sheriff's department just kind of hanging out on the beach on their dune buggies. Just chilling. And they see the Goonies running towards them, and they're like, oh, hey, there's those goobers. Basically everyone's reunited with their families. They're trying to, like, recount the story. The Fratellis show up. Sloth and Chunk have this great moment where Chunk is like, hey, you're gonna live with me now, Sloth. And Sloth is fucking overjoyed, and, like, they have a real bro moment. And you see One-Eyed Willie's ship just kind of sailing off into the sunset at that point. And that's how the movie ends. With One-Eyed Willie's ship, even with apparently a shredded sail, sailing off into the sunset. And that's how the Goonies ends. It rolls over the credits roll over a spectacular shot of a dilapidated. Yeah, what?
They get the treasure, right?
The unsung hero of this entire movie, Rosalita, somehow gets a hold of Mikey's backpack, which he has had this entire time. And Mikey had the foresight to stuff his marble bag full of gems. And I'm sorry, given the history that Rosalita has with this family, I don't understand why she wouldn't have kept quiet and kept the gems for herself. But she lets them know about these gems after the fact. And when Mikey's dad is about to sign, she starts freaking out and says, don't sign it, don't sign it. Here's these gems. So they end up getting this fistful of gems. They decide not to foreclose on the house. The father rips up one contract and ends up throwing 3 of them into the air. And everybody lives supposedly happily ever after. After a spectacular shot of One-Eyed Willie's shredded sail-ass ship sailing off into the sunset, which I imagine was later hunted down by the U.S. Navy and reclaimed as a fiscal resource of some kind because it was loaded with gold and gems. The end. Mark for the road. Get one of these. To the Goonies, because they never say die. Woof.